Okay, let's look at subshells. Very straightforward. Echo. Let's execute the same from within a subshell. Okay, so in this case it looks like there was no output. There was, however, output. It was simply within a subshell. So for those of you who might not immediately associate shell or subshell, think about it like as if we're starting a different shell session. We're executing whatever needs to be executed. Of course, this time I'm going to see it on the screen because I've started it interactively, and then we exit. So basically this has done more or less this, except for the output was not shown because it wasn't interactive. Another way of writing the same is this, but as a correction to a previous video, we probably should avoid using these backticks as a syntax for using subshells, and we should use this. So this was my colleague David who recommended this, and in the previous video I mentioned that he had recommended using agarcs with this particular syntax instead of using the underscore syntax. But that was actually my colleague Ramesh who had come up with that. It was very good. I had noticed it in one of his scripts, and I had been using underscore all along, but underscore doesn't always function correctly. It's better to use these curly brackets. That works more consistently when you go on to specify your command beyond xargs. So that is a small correction on a previous video. In any case, let's get back to subshells. So let us always use this format whenever we're scripting or whenever we're doing something to avoid parsing errors within complex strings. So talking about complex strings, how can we use subshells in a more advanced format? So let's say that we're doing something like echo test again, but this time we want to parse something in. Of course we can say something like var1 is a, and we can simply display var1 here, and it has appended it, but we can make it more dynamic. For instance, and I notice I'm not using curly brackets, I'm using parentheses here, so I'm going to be writing subshell syntax here instead of indicating that I'm working with a variable, and I'm going to do an ls output, and so now you can see that it has test, and then it has all these different outputs from the directory. And just to avoid some confusion there is a file that's called echo. I'll remove that just so that our future examples are a bit more clear. Yeah, there you go. So we've got that test, and then we start the directory. And of course we can do something like -n of 1. And this is maybe a good moment to briefly touch on head. So let's say that we have a file. Let's output our ls to file, and we'll say get file, and we'll say head minus n1. Then we'll just get the first line of our file only, so in other words the head, and there's a similar example tail. So let's have a look at the file. There's our head and there's our tail. So head and tail was two small commands that we hadn't looked at in any of the previous parts yet, I believe. So we could also say something like tail minus 20. Now in this case the file isn't 20 long, but you get the idea. It would show the last 20 lines. We can even do very interesting bits like take the last 5 lines and then take the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then take the first line only. So it's very versatile as to what you can do with it. If you don't specify any options, tail and head will by default use 10 lines. The first 10 or the last 10 or the first 10 lines of your file. Coming back to subshells, so let's maybe take another example. if we have a look, and maybe I should first introduce you to the PPID variable. So that gives the process identifier of the current process. So if we have a look at the proc directory, the process identifier of the current process, and what particular command started this. Well, in this case it's SSHD, which makes sense because we're running a self session within SSHD. So, how about if we encapsulate this and say execute this within a subshell, and we can take this a bit further, and we're going to just have a slight introduction here to the if command, SSHD, echo yes, started from SSHD, else echo no. Okay, so we can confirm that a particular process was started directly from SSHD as an example. We can do other things like okay, so here we slept for 1 second and then outputted some text. So basically from within a subshell you can use any other Linux command, execute something, and it will straight away be inserted into whatever it is you're executing. This goes very far. Like for instance, you can do something like, and just to conceptually understand what happened here, we ran a subshell. In the subshell we echoed ls. ls was passed back to this shell, and ls was executed. So we can even use this to execute commands, and it's very powerful. You can insert it pretty much anywhere, and it makes working with strings, with variables, with certain types of inputs, with arrays, a lot easier. Once you get the hang of subshells, you'll start using them anywhere and everywhere. Okay, the next section will be quite a large one, if, for, while, etc. So hope to see you there.